that's what's weird about it, and that's what I was trying to explore in the thought experiment is, like, how is it affecting consciousness? Because it seems like it is, consciousness is becoming more limited every time we take another sense away.
Welcome back to the Out of the Box podcast, where Steele and I, Jose, your host, get to talk about outside of the box ideas. Today, we're going to be talking about what would happen if you remove consciousness from the brain, right? Would you still have your five senses? What would happen? It's just a thought experiment that we want to kind of wrestle with and just kind of converse about. Before we actually get started, I just want to invite you guys to subscribe to our channel. This is a channel dedicated to searching for truth in this world. We bring guests from different fields of study and people just like you and I who want to learn more about the world and have something to share in this community. And we love to have conversations with them about just different topics. So if that sounds like something that you would be interested in subscribing and joining this journey, please subscribe. And also don't forget to leave a comment down below. So without further ado, Steele, I know you were mentioning that this is a thought experiment that you're just curious to kind of see what would happen if you removed consciousness from the brain. Like, how did you think about that experiment, or what made you interested in talking about that today?
Yeah, I've always thought consciousness was a big mystery that we still haven't completely figured out or solved. And I think I've heard of a fair amount of scientists that agree and that they also think that, consciousness is still an unknown entity in science, that we're still trying to pinpoint what it is and what it means. So that's what's always drawn my attention to it. And I did that, when I wrote that book about God and stuff a long time ago. And when I was at St. Mary's University, um, consciousness was like the biggest focus of that whole deep dive, deep personal research dive into God's existence was all about really what I started most heavy with was consciousness. Because if we can prove consciousness can exist outside of our body and outside of death, then that leads to more, well, it points more towards, kind of, I guess, in correspondence with God's existence. So yeah, I mean, that's what drew me to it. And when I was doing that, that's when I came up with a thought experiment. It was actually for an essay I was writing for the independent study I did with Eric Chelstrom, who was on here, the philosophy professor. And I remember writing about like I was trying to pick consciousness apart, you know, and part of that involved starting with the five senses because we've talked about this, how do we perceive reality? And it's all limited to the five senses. And we can go deeper than that. Of course, I feel like there's more than five senses kind of if you dive deeper. But to keep it focused on the five senses right now, I was thinking for the thought experiment, what I did was I took each sense away and thought about how it would affect the person. So which one would you want to start with? Like which of the five senses should we take away first? Like,
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking taste, just
so if we
like,
don't have taste, yeah.
yeah, if we didn't have taste, I love food. And so
Yeah.
if I couldn't taste what I was putting in my mouth, it was just like the same, whether I put rocks in my mouth, whether I put candy in my mouth, it
Yeah.
doesn't spark any chemical reaction. Perhaps, perhaps, maybe if I don't have taste, maybe I just have the aftermath of the pleasure that I'm receiving from putting something in my mouth. But at that point, I won't know if I'm eating something that is rotten or something that is
Mm.
actually, up to date. I could see it, if my vision still if we still haven't
Your
taken away my
salvation.
vision.
Well, and you might be able to smell it too. Sometimes we can smell rotten food. But yeah,
Yeah, that's
you're right.
right.
Taking away the taste, it takes away our survival mechanism of knowing when something is going to kill us or make us sick or not. And then the mechanism of throwing up or whatever is like the body's defense against like toxins that could harm the body.
Yeah.
Yeah, if we
Well,
don't have,
some people during COVID lost their taste,
yeah,
right?
have you experienced that before? Like,
No, no, I've never experienced it, thankfully.
yeah, same here. Yeah, thankfully, I think I've had times when my tongue was like numb by like a medicine or like I don't know if it was the orthodontist or I can't remember what it I don't know, it was a throat spray, for strep throat, that's what it was, and sometimes it would drip on my tongue, and then it would make me not be able to really taste much or my tongue felt numb, and it was just a weird thing, you know? Like, you ever have a part of your body go numb before, like,
Mhm.
with a medical thing or anything like that? It feels kinda weird, right? Like,
Yeah, like
it's like it's not there, or
yeah,
like it doesn't belong to you, right? Does
yeah, 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 it's like a ghost kind of,
Yeah.
it's just
Like, or
yeah.
if your arm falls asleep, like, sometimes my arm has fallen asleep so bad that I couldn't feel anything. I don't know
Mhm.
if you ever
So it's almost like that, I'm guessing, like when you lose your sense of taste, it's like a numbing of the tongue, right?
Yeah,
Where the taste buds are.
exactly.
Um,
And you can't differentiate between like you said, you can't differentiate between flavors. So you don't know if something tastes bad or good, you're just kinda like I guess you could feel the texture because you still have the sense of touch with your tongue, like,
yeah,
your tongue can still feel texture, hot, cold, but
yeah,
that's taste, I mean, and it's really taste is really complicated, it's like the chemical, like, it falls into these crevices in the tongue, and it produces a chemical reaction in the tongue, and then sends nerve signals that are through the tongue to the brain, and then the brain interprets the taste and the flavor and stuff. So, of course, if you have brain damage, that could affect it too, but yeah, that's taste. Which one next?
hmm. What do you think? Your turn.
Um, I'll go with, like, smell. Let's say we take
Smell.
away taste and smell, they're both gone now.
Oh, both of them at the same time.
Yeah, so what happens, like, you can't taste anything, and then you can't smell rotten food anymore, you know?
Yeah.
What else
Dang. Yeah, I wonder, like I mean, I think human beings, more primitively, we use our smell for survival mechanisms. Nowadays, I felt like the sharpness of our sense of smell has gone away,
Yeah, probably so.
you know. But if the house was burning down or something, or I smell a fire, I wouldn't be able to smell it. So I could walk into danger in a sense,
Yeah, or propane, right? Like a leak, a gas leak.
Yeah, 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 propane or carbon monoxide,
Yeah.
if I'm work let's say because I recently did some automotive stuff, if you were working in with a car and it's like isolated, you have the car on, the gas that it's releasing, it releases a certain smell, but if you can't smell it, and you start consuming that, you could basically die
Oh,
off of that, just smelling carbon monoxide.
yeah, so our sense of smell kind of, in that sense, keeps us alive almost,
Mhm.
in that example.
Yeah. Yeah, and even just like, um just a sense of freshness, sometimes like when you smell fresh air, I guess you wouldn't be able to appreciate that anymore,
Yeah.
just
What
smelling
about
fresh
food?
air or smelling roses,
And what about
gardens.
like, have you ever, like, been sick and food tasted differently before? Like,
Mm.
it didn't taste as strong because you couldn't really because your, nose was, like, stopped up.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, that's actually true because your taste, like, it's actually,
Yeah, it's
um
connected.
yeah, connected to the smell, right? So, I don't know if you noticed, but sometimes, like, when people wanna eat something, they first smell it,
Yeah, yeah.
like coffee
Mexican.
beans, or they wanna smell it first before they consume it because it's almost like, it adds part of it. I wonder if that's related to, like, when you smell, like, somebody that you like, and
Yeah,
you get their sense of smell, and
yeah.
they actually say that you can smell their like pheromones or something like that. I don't know
Well,
what's
see,
good.
that one's trickier, because I remember my biology class, they were kinda, like, skeptical about the pheromones in humans. Because experiments are kind of mixed on whether it's true or not. For animals, yes. But for humans, we're not sure if it's more of a vestigial thing in evolution to where it's like something that we adopted from animals, but we don't necessarily use the same way as animals. But I
Yeah,
don't know, I would have to look more into it, but like I know what you mean. Like
but even just the smell of like
but
cologne or
I was
or
gonna s-
perfume from
I was gonna say
someone,
because I've actually
it reminds you of that person when you
yeah,
smell it. And if you can't smell them, or even let's say like your own personal hygiene, like if you can't smell that, you're like
body odor. Yeah.
your body odor smells bad, then you
Yeah.
have almost like the blind side in that sense, and
You
you're
repel people
then
away.
wondering why people run away when they
Yeah.
when you get close to that.
People start associating you with get away from that person. No, but,
Yeah.
yeah, you remember when we talked about, rewards and punishments, you know? Something
Uh-huh.
like that. So think about it like this. If you like someone, if you're in love with someone and she has a certain perfume that she uses every time that you're around her, you start associating that smell with being around her, which being around someone you like is naturally going to make your hormones, change in a positive way that makes you feel happier and excited or whatever feelings that may come up. And so, yeah, you're definitely right. Like the brain associates the reward of being with her with the smell of the perfume that she's wearing. And so then that becomes linked and associated in the brain, like we talked about with rewards and punishments and operant conditioning. And so then, like, the smell itself becomes a reward. So even if the smell comes from somewhere else other than her, like, you're reminded of her and you might even have, like you might start thinking about her, or if she's, like, walks by and you catch the smell, then you start getting those feel good hormones again. I've actually
Yeah.
experienced that firsthand, and it's, I don't know, have you ever had that before, like, with anything?
Yeah, oh yeah, yeah. Sometimes like there's a certain smell, that you smell from someone and they'll give you a hug and then later throughout the day, for some reason that smell stayed on your shirt or something and you smell it, you get a whiff of it and you're like, it reminds you of that person because that's how they smell, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
Or or yeah, sometimes like, certain smells might remind you of a certain person. Like coffee reminds me of my grandmother, because she drinks a lot of coffee. And so in the mornings when she's like with me or with us, she makes coffee, and that's the only time that I smell coffee in the house because my parents don't drink coffee. And so I almost identify the smell of coffee with my grandma being near, you know?
And did you know, like, that makes sense? Because did you know, like, I heard that smell is one of the most powerful triggers of memory of all the
Mm.
5 senses.
Yeah, it's
Forever.
cool because I think there was a statistics that human beings can remember almost like 300 something different smells, like memorize different
Wow.
smells.
I did not
Like
that's
it's something like
really
in the hundreds. Yeah, like
that's
350
pretty
something.
and it's crazy because, like you said, we don't use it I feel like we don't use it as much, and yet our brain
Mhm.
is able to, like, hold all of those computations, it's just it's kinda mind blowing, but, um,
Yeah.
yeah, so, I mean, if you took away taste and smell, like, you're very limited on detecting, like we said, toxins in the environment, whether it's toxin you get on your skin or like eat or whatever. And you think about it like human waste, like you know what I'm talking about. Like human waste smells bad for a reason because we're not supposed to like consume that, right? Like I'm not trying to get crazy, but like when you think about it logically and you put all the things together, it actually makes sense why we're repelled by the smell, because if it was the opposite, we would be putting toxins back into our body and that could harm us. So kind of thing, I think it goes back to like the survival mechanisms built within us.
Yeah. And it's also like the mouth is through like where you discover more about the world.
Mm.
So I don't know if you um we might have talked about this in the podcast, but little babies put everything in their mouth. And the
Yeah,
reason for that is because that's how human beings like learn about the world. They're like, "Oh, what is this pen?" And they put it in their mouth because they want to know more about the world. They want to know more about this object that they have at hand. And so they'll put it in their mouth to learn more about the world. And so, I wonder, if not having taste, inhibits our ability to know more about truth,
yeah.
you
Or
know?
or even go through that developmental stage as a child, that you're mentioning. Yeah, it
Mhm.
does make you think. So it's your turn to pick like what's the next 5 cents to take away?
Well, I guess if we're going kind of, upwards, we could do sight,
Okay.
so we have taste, smell, and sight
Yeah.
now gone.
Ooh, that's yeah, and of course, we know there's people who are blind, and
Mhm.
they're usually able to adapt quite well with the sound, like using sounds
Yeah, they can still
navigate
hear and touch
navigate the
the
environment.
vibrations of different like moving objects.
Yeah, so, like and that's why I was thinking, like, taste and smell doesn't seem like as big of a deal to take away. It certainly takes enjoyment out of eating, you know?
Yeah,
And then when you take sight away, it's like the person can still survive and navigate the world, like, with walking sticks, dogs for blind people, things like that, and braille. So you could still
yeah.
reasonably adapt and survive, it seems.
And that's interesting because I think you mentioned something very, very key in human existence is movement, right? So navigating through the world, right?
Definitely.
So it's almost like that's like what human beings do, we navigate through the world, we search, we seek, we knock, we we go on adventures. And I think that's mainly like what novels are, it's an adventure, it's a seeking purpose, seeking, we find more about the world and discover more about ourselves through movement, through action. And
Yeah,
so we can't just theorize about the world. We almost have to go out there and prove theories, right?
to experience
Try
it.
to prove them right, because otherwise, it might be just a shadow of the truth instead of the actual truth.
Yeah, and we have to experience the world to do that through our 5 senses.
Hmm.
And it's interesting you mentioned movement because movement is a sense of itself. And there's a part of the brain designed to sense where our hand is right now, where our feet are right now, where our head is. And if we didn't have that, we wouldn't know where any of our body parts are. And we wouldn't know our relation to the environment in terms of our existence in the world. And it'd be quite confusing if we didn't have that ability.
Yeah.
So I'm
There's some meditation, like guided meditations that almost like get you not out not outside of your body, but it's almost to lose or confuse the sense of exactly that, like where your body parts are,
like,
almost to the point where you can sense the whole room, and so now you're not just sensing yourself, and like where your body parts are, but you're sensing like the big picture of the room you're inside, and you start filling it up with water, because I've tried it out. You start filling it up with water, and it's almost like your mind, it almost expands to sense the room that you're in instead of just your body. So it's almost like you you release it from the trap. It's
it's like
I
those.
don't like to use the word trap because it's not trapped,
Right.
but like it's inside of our bodies. Like it's almost like just calculating what's going on in our bodies. But when you release it into like the space that you're in, it almost forgets it's not calculating not just your body anymore, but like everything. And so it's kind of a weird experience. It's like not out of body experience, because that I think might be a little bit different, but it does feel very weird because you feel uh loss of sense of where your body is. Like you
Yeah,
just
yeah.
like you're part of the void of like, or the part of the water.
It's like you don't feel your arm anymore. I've done some guided meditations on YouTube where or even sleep paralysis, where I start feeling like even though my arm is here, I can no longer feel it here. Like
Exactly.
changes. It's a really strange experience. And it reminds me of sensory deprivation tanks or other forms of doing a similar thing. And it is a very strange because it makes you realize how our brain just is so, I don't know, so weird. Like the way we perceive things is really weird. And when you start messing with it, it's like you start realizing how dependent you are on your brain to know reality. Because when you
Yeah.
change it, it changes reality for you. Maybe that's the sixth sense. Hey, I don't know. But so if we take away sight, I think most people, we know like what happens, right? I mean, you just can't really see what's in front of you, obviously, and it takes away a lot of things like you can't you can't see movies, you can't see if there's like a danger in the environment. You can still read by the sense of touch. So you really just kind of rely on touch and hearing at that point to not to
Yeah.
there's
Yeah, and I think, also colors, just
bright colors.
colors, you know, objects, geometric objects,
Yeah, if
you just don't know like what the world looks like.
someone's
So
colorblind especially, like then they don't have any visual memories, I guess.
yeah, exactly.
They have no perception of what color even means.
Yeah. And I wonder if, well, I'm sure this happens because it's happened in other cases, but your hearing and your touch become heightened
Uh,
to kind of supplement for the lack of vision,
yeah, compensation. Yeah,
compensates.
that's exactly right. And so they become stronger, like more sensitive to it. Like you said, vibrations.
Yeah. So in a sense, you could still, you could still, what's it called?
Have consciousness, I guess.
Yeah, you could still have some sort of consciousness or ability to, like you said, navigate the world.
Because I mean, I think at this point, I guess me and you agree, but you tell me like, I guess when we think of consciousness, it's kind of like just awareness, like pure awareness. Just I mean,
And it's
I
also, I think we had in a previous podcast talked about this idea because in theological sense they use the spirit, the soul, and the body, right?
yeah,
So the spirit is like, the what people call like the emotional side, like the heart. The soul is the mind or the consciousness, and the body, of course, that translates directly. But the soul is the one that's always trying to decide between the body and the spirit, right? The spirit wants to do, what some people might say like virtuous things or holy things, and then the body wants to do, things of the body, like pleasures, right? That it might want, and so the soul or the consciousness is always trying to be aware of these two sides and try to make decisions, right? And so it's almost like it receives information from the body and it receives information from the soul or from the spirit or the emotions, and then it makes a decision in the consciousness. It makes an informed decision, right? You can say because it's received information from both sides.
that's interesting. That's
So it's almost like consciousness is where we're able to make decisions from.
yeah, you know what that sounds like. We talked about before. I know Sigmund Freud's theory, the id, the ego, and the superego. So like the body is the id, and then I guess the spirit is the ego, or no, the superego, and then the consciousness part is like the ego is stuck. The ego is like stuck between the superego and the id.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
that's interesting. Yeah, I think consciousness is complicated, and the most simplest form I can think of is like maybe like awareness, us, I, you, like that's consciousness. And so what we're doing is we're taking away things from the physical body, like smell, taste, and sight, and we're seeing how it affects consciousness. It's like that's what's weird about it. And that's what I was trying to explore in the thought experiment is like, how is it affecting consciousness? Because it seems like it is, consciousness is becoming more limited every time we take another sense away. So if we take
Yeah, but it's interesting going back to the idea that I was sharing of like the body, the spirit, and the soul. The soul has to make a decision, right? Which is
right,
the consciousness, right? So the more that you limit the body from its inputs of information, the less information the consciousness has to make decisions, right? So it is in a sense limiting consciousness from being able to make informed decisions, right?
exactly.
Or take action.
Yeah, you're right, and that's what I was playing devil's advocate with in the essay that I was writing. I was trying to figure out and explore the other side, and like I could see how science neuroscientists and atheists would say that means that the consciousness is an illusion of the brain because when you start limiting the physical aspects of the brain, consciousness becomes limited, meaning consciousness depends on the brain in order to exist, meaning consciousness is an illusion of the brain. But I mean that's a whole other like side discussion. But kind of like keeping focus on the five senses though. If we take away like hearing, so now we have no taste, no smell, no sight, and no hearing. And we know someone who maybe didn't experience all of this, but like Helen Keller, have you ever heard about her?
Oh yes, yes,
She
yes.
she was born without, or I don't know, she was very early on, she didn't have vision or hearing, and yet she was intelligent and she was able to learn how to communicate with a sense of touch, and she was able to like learn Braille. and she actually wrote books and published them and went to college and stuff, despite not having sight or hearing. So we know it's possible that even
Yeah,
with just the sense of touch, someone can learn, be intelligent, and communicate. So
yeah, that's true.
so if the sense of touch is all that's left, I mean, what do we have left here, like, to work with?
Yeah, I mean, sense of touch is probably one of the most important ones, because it's through one of the biggest aspects of like where we connect with things. So like when we grab something, we're connecting atoms to atoms, just
Uh,
even though it's not like visually, like you can't see it, but it's like atoms are touching in a sense. And it's actually a proven experiment where um it's kind of funny, but there's there's uh there's experiments that have happened where people have sat in the toilet seat for like very long periods of time, and their body stuck to the toilet seat.
like it fused.
It almost fused itself into the toilet seat. So if you think about it, it's like we're always in constant contact with atoms. We're touching the floor. We're always touching something. We're touching clothing. We're touching. Our glasses are touching. We're touching these earphones. So just we're always in constant touch of something. We're never disconnected. Um, even if we were to fly, we would be in contact with
Air,
air.
yeah, air molecules.
Yeah,
It's so
yeah,
weird
yeah.
because, like, how you where you're saying that reminds me of, like, I always wondered, and maybe someone's already explored this, but I mean, it seems like we cannot phase through objects, right? Like I grab this pen and my finger doesn't go through it, and the harder I push, the more pressure I feel. Meaning, if you interpret that like my brain is interpreting a signal that's being fired from my finger to sense pressure, depth, and all that stuff, and it's telling me that the harder I press down, the more pressure I feel, and that's just an electrical signal that's being processed in my brain. That's all that is. And maybe other people can argue that it's more than that. But just kind of focusing on this. I often wonder, like, if everything's made of atoms, maybe the reason why I cannot phase through this pen right now is because the opposite electrical charges. We know atoms have, positive and negative charges, and that's based on like the number of electrons, neutrons, and protons. And maybe that's the reason why we don't phase through objects because they have an opposite electric charge. Maybe that's the only reason, because we know opposites repel each other, like magnets. And if that's how atoms form together is with electrical charges, maybe that's why we don't, phase through a table or whatever. I don't know. I'd have to look more into it, but I always thought that was an interesting idea. Like, what if that explains it? And if we could control the electric charges of atoms, then we could phase through objects. But I don't know. Or maybe it's not that simple. I don't know. I'm just
Yeah,
kind
I
of
mean, it almost seems like we're not too far away from the impossible of
yeah,
like altering, you know, our capacity to transform atoms, right? Or
yeah.
like
Apparently,
move through atoms.
it would take
It's almost like if this we found a way to make this pen as liquid like as solid and as liquid at the same time as water, so that you would just like pass your finger through it and it would stay like in its
yeah.
uniform shape.
And what I hear, like the little that I've heard, is that it would take an enormous amount of energy to do something like that, to change an atom into something else by removing or adding protons, electrons, and all that. But but yeah, if we just have the sense of touch, I mean, we know someone can still learn Braille. They can still kind of feel their way in the environment, but if they're born that way, it's a lot harder, and it takes a lot of learning and training and a different way of
But it's almost like each of our senses is made to uh to help us seek truth in the world and seek knowledge, right? So it's almost like that's the way we input information to our through our body to our consciousness,
yeah,
right?
and it's a limit.
And
So we're limiting our knowledge then. The
so
more,
I think, well, for example, the case of Helen Keller, she was able to still write books and still do things in the world, even though she was quote unquote limited input, um, in her inputs. Yeah, like hearing and vision. She was able to still have touch, and so she was able to move through the world, navigate through the world,
Right.
right? And so it seems like you're still able to discover knowledge, even though you might not see or hear.
Yeah, there's still some knowledge that you can somehow translate, with the sense of touch into,
Yeah.
and
And it's
then
almost like if somebody's willing to share, like be patient with you and to like teach you how to use your touch to learn about the world, then I think it's still possible then in
you can
those
still,
cases.
yeah, you can still store memories, but think about this, and this is where things get really interesting. In the thought experiment. So like if you only have the sense of touch, you can still store memories, but you're not gonna if you're born like that, you're not gonna have any visual memories or auditory memories. It's just gonna be all your memories are just gonna be based on the sense of touch. So that's I can't even imagine that. I mean, that's hard to even kind of comprehend, because me and you are all our memories are visual, auditory, our dreams are. So would they dream in the sense of touch? Would they have memories in the sense of touch? You know what I mean? Imagination.
That's yeah.
It's
Yeah, I wonder that too. Like they would definitely dream in the sense of touch. That's so cool.
be strange, really strange. And would that expand their variety of sense of touch dreams? Because we balance it between the five different senses, but they only have one sense. How we talked about compensation. So like maybe it's like more layered sense of touch. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, it's almost like their sense of touch becomes heightened by the limited
Yeah.
sense of hearing or vision.
Yeah. Okay, so
Mhm.
here's where it gets crazy, all right, in the thought experiment. This is okay, so if we take away all five senses, we have nothing left. No sense of touch, right? Let's say someone was born this way. What would that be like? What would reality be like? Like seriously.
Yeah, that would be interesting. I really think that since you're taking away the senses of the body, you would only be left with the internal senses,
Exactly.
right?
Just go into
The internal senses of the body and the in your consciousness. So now your consciousness can only rely on internal
things.
aspects, which would be like chemical reactions happening in your body.
And the problem is
um
like there's no trigger for the chemical reaction if there's no five senses, I guess. But but here's the thing. That's why I say born with it and then versus lived. So like let's say you lived 20 years of your life, and then your five senses were all taken away. So you'd have memories, right? Like you still have memories of the 20 years you lived. So like you said, if you went internally, so your life would go from external and internal to only internal, like you said. And but then you still have your memories, which you can use to form your imagination. So it seems like your whole universe would become imagination and memories.
yeah,
It's really weird.
it's almost like when somebody enters a coma, they're still alive, but they're just not moving. They don't show any signs of emotions or show any physical like aspects of them. And I think at that point, since they can't move through the world, then they don't have an ability to learn about the world. They don't have the ability to find truth in the world.
And
And
that's what
so it's just an internal like aspect.
yeah, because they're paralyzed, kind of. They can't move. And if someone could move and they still didn't have their five senses, they could technically still move, but because they can't feel anything, they wouldn't know that they're moving. Or it seems like they wouldn't know, like, because the only way I
Yeah,
know
because let's
can
say if they hit something, they bump their head into a wall, they don't
yeah,
feel it.
exactly. I can't
So
even
they could still be hitting, like trying to go through a wall and not feel it.
never know it. Like their whole existence could be doing that and they would never know. And so
Yeah.
that's really hard to imagine for us, but it's really hard to imagine. Like I don't even know how that would, because you literally have no connection to the outside world at all. nothing. You can't you can't hear if you're hitting something, you can't feel if you're hitting something, you can't see. So, like, you don't even know where you are in relation to the environment and to the universe.
I wonder if people in coma are happen to be in that scenario. Like all their senses like go away,
Yeah, it makes you want I think
you know?
I've heard that they can still hear or something, but
Mm,
or if they can feel, I have no idea, but yeah, it makes you
it's
wonder.
interesting.
But yeah, I like what you said because I was thinking too, like, it just seems like you would only have the internal world left, so memories, I guess imagination, dreams, but you would be limited to like only the 20 years that you've lived, so you wouldn't be able to form new memory. I mean, I don't know if you'd be able to form new memories, maybe with your imagination. Like if you imagine the future thing and think about future events and then store those into your memory, maybe. But that's all you would have is just thinking about stuff, visualizing things. So, like, I mean, that's what consciousness would be at that point. And so, what does that mean? Like, and so that's what I was trying to figure out with the thought experiment is like, what does that mean about consciousness? If consciousness becomes more and more limited when you take more of the senses away, it's like you could interpret it in different ways. Like, you could interpret as consciousness being an illusion of the brain, or you could interpret it that the soul is consciousness, but it depends on our physical body and our physical brain. And when our physical body is limited, like when someone gets their hand chopped off, our spirit can't fix that, like it's gone. So our spirit becomes more limited by our physical body because our spirit is, I guess, trapped maybe in our physical body by the design of God or something. And maybe like that's just the way it is, I guess, on as we live on earth. I don't know. And so I'm just trying to understand that, like, consciousness is the way I phrased it in the essay was consciousness could be thought of as an observer instead of a mover. Consciousness is the observer of our body and our five senses, and the more you take away those senses, the it doesn't mean consciousness can't be a spirit because a spirit can still be an observer, but I don't know, it's a lot.
Yeah, and I think like how it's made most sense is like kind of like what we were saying, like the ego, the super ego, the body, uh, the soul, the spirit. It all kind of keeps coming back to these three forms of um of being, right? And which is interesting because when we think about the Holy Spirit, the Trinity, it's three beings. Jesus, who came to be as a human being, we have the body, then we have the Spirit, the Holy Spirit, and then the Father who, supervises both the Son and the Spirit, right? And so it's almost like this Trinitarian idea that in the Bible says we're made in the image and likeness of God, right? Body, soul, and spirit, right? So God is the Spirit, which what the Bible is what says, in the Spirit of God, roamed in the abyss before creation, right? And so it's interesting, like consciousness, like ultimate consciousness, the Father, right? Lingered in existence before the creation of the world. And so it's such deep, like if you just read it like that, you're like, oh, it sounds like a fairy tale. But when you start thinking about it, it's like, whoa, that actually makes sense. We're made in the image and likeness of God, this Trinitarian aspect, body, soul, and spirit, right? And so that means that, we're connected with that as well. Like that's what we're made out of. And so going back to the thought experiment, removing the body leaves you with like this dual
Yeah.
aspect where you only have one input, right? Now, instead of having two inputs, you have one input to make judgment off of, which is your internal um aspects, right? And so it's almost like you're not human anymore.
Yeah, so it's like you're not human because how we define a human is like I guess the five senses or something,
Mhm.
or being able to move. It's yeah, it's complicated.
Yeah, like human beings are both body and spirit, right? We're not just spiritual beings. We're not like angels, or like spiritual beings like ghosts or stuff like that, where we have a body, right? Which is what forms the consciousness. And so I think, I and this might maybe going a little bit away from the topic, but I think angels have consciousness as well, but they just have two input, that one input, the internal input,
Mm.
right? And that's how they form their consciousness.
As far as we know, they don't have a physical like physical.
Physical body, yeah. And
Their
so yeah, that's why I think it's so interesting. Like, I mean, in the Christian sense, like people have said, they have wings and they have this body, which potentially maybe they do, I don't know. But as far as we know, they're just spiritual beings. So
yeah,
they're just a spirit. And so
or
they
that's
don't have a body.
the best description that they could come up with based on what they were seeing. Because we talked about how words in the Bible can be the best estimate of what they're experiencing, but maybe aren't the right words. Because,
Mm,
if they're higher dimensional beings that we can't really describe because they're beyond anything we've ever experienced on Earth, then we're going to use metaphors and the best estimates that we can to try to describe them. That's why there's a lot of descriptions in the Bible that seem to not make a lot of sense. But if you think about it, if it's higher dimensional, complicated things, how else would we describe them other than the best words we can think of and the best combinations we can think of? And almost like a metaphorical way of just it's not a literal thing. Maybe it's more like I'm not maybe still literal, but like it's just hard to describe in human words almost. So we have to like combine things together to describe something complicated, because they use like I think something like bronze arms and like I'm trying to remember, like there's really interesting descriptions in the Bible sometimes that are really out there, you know. But
yeah.
yeah, and to correct, I don't mean like someone's not human if they don't have the senses. I just mean like it's a philosophical idea of like at what point is someone no longer experiencing reality? Because I guess there's still a human being. If you took five senses away from me today, I'd still be classified as a human according to other people. But to myself, would I still feel human? Maybe that's the question. And maybe I
Mhm.
wouldn't. Maybe I wouldn't even know. Because then I wouldn't have anything to go off of anymore.
Base it, yeah.
So, but yeah, but like all that to say, what I was trying to build up to is the whole point of that thought experiment was to figure out if consciousness can exist outside of the physical body, to see if taking away limitations of the physical body, how it affects consciousness. Is consciousness dependent on our brain to exist, or can our consciousness exist away from our brain, meaning it's a spirit or soul? So that was the whole reason behind it, and it brings up a lot of questions. I think a lot more to explore. You know,
Yeah. Yeah,
but
it's definitely interesting just to kind of little by little take away different senses of the body, but
yeah,
it's almost like it's stacking up on each other. It wasn't like we take away sight, but we still leave out taste, or it was just like little by little reducing the amount of senses that we have. And so yeah,
yeah,
it was interesting. I know you've mentioned before like the idea of having a those like rooms or something, like where they remove all the senses, or
sensory,
like a little bed, the water bed,
sensory,
where
yeah, sensory deprivation tanks.
sensory deprivation.
Yeah,
So yeah, those are, that might be interesting to try out one day.
yeah. So what happens is the brain starts making up stimuli because there's none. We take It's like when you take things away from the brain, it starts making things up to like fill in the gaps. So it's kind of weird. Maybe that would happen. Maybe if you took away the five senses of someone, maybe they'd start hallucinating. I don't know. Maybe their brain would start creating a new reality from
Hmm.
inside. That would be weird. See, like there's so many questions it brings up. Like man,
Yeah,
yeah. But what
that'd
are you,
be interesting.
any final thoughts on any of it? Or
Yeah, I think based on off of that idea, I wonder if people could still experience like God even without the body, just like angels experience God without a body,
Yeah, exactly.
without their senses.
Maybe
So
consciousness would go outside the body.
so
Yeah,
maybe they still could connect, because you know how there's this idea that you can connect to the ultimate consciousness, which is God, right? Like
yeah,
consciousness. And so maybe since we have the ability to connect to consciousness, maybe, but then now they don't have a body, maybe they could still connect to consciousness and still maybe receive information from that ultimate source,
yeah,
but they're not able to decipher it through their physical or like their human senses.
yeah. It's a whole nother realm. Exactly.
Yeah, it's interesting. All right, guys. Well, thank you for watching this podcast. Let us know what you thought was interesting about our podcast today. We hope that you enjoyed it. And if you found something interesting, please let us know down below in the comment section. We always enjoy listening and seeing your comments. And until next time, we will talk to you soon. Take care.